The air in Houston's Fifth Ward carried the scent of summer heat and dust, the kind that clung to your skin and made the world feel slower. In the mid-1950s, the streets were alive with children's laughter, the thump of jump ropes hitting cracked pavement, and the soft hum of radios drifting out of open windows. On those narrow blocks, everyone knew everyone. Neighbors waved from porches, church bells marked the passing hours, and children like 5-year-old Dollie Ann Henson were free to roam a little, as long as they stayed within shouting distance of home. Dolly was the kind of child people remembered. Her hair framed her small face in soft curls, and her eyes, large, curious, and endlessly trusting, seemed to drink in every detail around her. She adored her family, especially her mother, who could always be found humming a gospel tune while folding laundry or stirring a pot on the stove. Theirs was a modest home, warm not because of what it held, but because of who lived inside it. That summer, Dolly had learned to skip rope faster than her older cousins, and she'd been telling everyone she was going to be a teacher one day, because, as she put it, teachers get to tell stories all day long. She was young enough to believe the world was entirely good, that adults always told the truth, and that her neighborhood was a safe place where nothing truly bad could happen. But the Fifth Ward also carried its shadows. The grown-ups knew that behind the friendly nods and Sunday smiles, some people carried secrets. Children didn't notice the way certain neighbors watched them a little too closely, or the way hushed conversations stopped when little ears were near. Dolly's parents, like most, worked hard and trusted their community, but they couldn't see every moment. In the haze of those golden summer days, the danger didn't announce itself. It didn't roar in with sirens or warnings. It crept in quietly, disguised as kindness, a familiar voice, a neighbor's smile, a promise so tempting it could make a child forget everything they'd been told about staying close to home. And in that trust, in that moment, the path of Dolly's life was about to split forever. It was the kind of summer day that seemed to stretch on forever. The Texas sun blazed overhead, baking the pavement until the air shimmered above it. Somewhere, a radio played a Sam Cooke tune that drifted lazily through the neighborhood, blending with the rhythmic squeak of a clothesline pulley as Dolly's mother hung fresh laundry. The street smelled faintly of fried chicken from a house down the block, and the laughter of kids playing tag echoed between the houses like an endless song of innocence. Dolly was sitting on the curb, her knees drawn up, watching ants march in a neat little line. She wore a cotton dress patterned with tiny blue flowers, the hem brushing against her scuffed white socks. She didn't notice the shadow at first. Only when it lingered longer than passing neighbors did she glance up. It was someone she recognized, a neighbor, not a stranger. That alone erased any instinct to be wary. He was smiling in that easy, casual way adults used when they wanted a child to like them. He crouched down so his eyes were level with hers and said, "You ever been on a real train before, Dolly?" Her face lit up. She shook her head. She'd seen trains rumble past on distant tracks, their whistles calling out like faraway dreams, but the thought of riding one, that was magic. "I was just about to head to the station," he said, his voice warm, almost conspiratorial. "Thought you might like to come along, see the inside, maybe even take a ride." It was so simple, so tempting. Dolly looked back toward her house. Her mother was busy with the laundry, the white sheets billowing like sails in the heat. No one else was watching. "You don't have to tell her right now," he added gently. "We'll be back before she even misses you." The offer pulled at her like gravity. A real train ride, a story to tell her cousins, an adventure. She stood, dusted off her dress, and slipped her small hand into his. The walk away from the curb felt ordinary, almost dull, except for the bubbling excitement in her chest. They turned a corner, then another, and the sound of the other children's laughter faded behind them. The houses became unfamiliar. The streets stretched wider. Somewhere along the way, the voice that had sounded warm began to sound quieter, less conversational. He didn't slow down. Dolly had to take 2 steps for every one of his, but she didn't complain. Not yet. They reached a car parked at the side of the road. He opened the passenger door and motioned her in. Just for the ride to the station, he assured. But the station never came. Instead, the car rolled past every familiar landmark she knew, through streets she'd never walked, into the edges of Houston, where the buildings grew sparse and the landscape turned to stretches of road and dusty fields. Dolly's small hands twisted in her lap, her excitement giving way to unease. "Where's the train?" she asked, her voice thin. "Not far," he said, without looking at her. But in the pit of her stomach, a cold feeling settled, a child's first taste of dread, sharp and unshakable. She didn't know it yet, but the moment she left that curb, her life as she knew it had already ended. The road ahead wasn't leading to a station. It was carrying her out of Houston, out of Texas, and out of the arms of the family who would spend the next 5 decades wondering where she had gone. By the time the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in molten gold, Dolly was already hours from home. The hum of the car engine had become a constant, like the mechanical heartbeat of this strange new reality. Outside the window, fields blurred into shadows, the occasional telephone pole flicking past like a metronome counting down something she couldn't name. She had stopped asking about the train. Each time she'd tried, his answer had been short, almost distracted. Eventually, she'd pressed her lips together and stared at her shoes instead. The once bright white socks were now flecked with dust. The car pulled off the highway and down a smaller road, lined with tall trees. Their branches reached over the narrow lane like skeletal arms, blotting out the last of the sunlight. When they finally stopped, it wasn't at a station, it was at a small house, the kind that looked abandoned at first glance. Paint peeled from its siding, and a single dim bulb glowed weakly in the front window. He ushered her inside. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something sour. Her shoes squeaked against the warped floorboards as she stepped in. "Sit here," he said, pointing to an old couch. She obeyed. The springs groaned under her small weight. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. She couldn't tell. Somewhere in the house, a radio played a distant country song, the words too muffled to understand. The man moved in and out of the room, sometimes speaking in low tones on the phone, sometimes watching her in silence. When night fell fully, he handed her a blanket. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "Where's my mama?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "She knows you're safe," he lied smoothly. "You'll see her soon." But that night, Dolly lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster until her eyes burned. Somewhere deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. Morning didn't bring answers. Instead, there was another drive, longer this time, the world outside the window shifting from Texas plains to unfamiliar towns. Days began to blur into each other. The man didn't speak much now, and when he did, his tone was clipped. Eventually, the roads grew quieter, the towns smaller. until they were somewhere far from everything Dolly had ever known. A place where no one looked twice at a man traveling with a little girl. Her name began to fade from the conversations. He called her sweetheart or kiddo, never Dolly. The further they went, the less she existed as the child who had once sat on that curb in Houston. Back home, her absence had already cracked the world open. Her mother dropped the laundry and ran through the street, calling her name until her voice went hoarse. Neighbors searched yards and alleys, calling Dollie Ann into the sticky evening air. The police arrived, their flashlights sweeping empty lots and drainage ditches, but the curb was empty. The ants marched on, and Houston swallowed the last place anyone had seen her. As the days turned to weeks, and the weeks into months, the search spread wider. Posters with her face, bright-eyed, wearing that little blue-flowered dress, appeared in shop windows and on telephone poles, but each one grew sun-bleached and weather-beaten, the paper curling at the edges until it was replaced by the next, and then the next. In a way, Dolly was vanishing twice, once in the real world, and once in memory. The years ahead would stretch long and merciless, and yet far away in a place no one was looking, the little girl, who had been Dollie Ann Henson, was still out there, her life rewoven into a story no one back home could have imagined. It was a regular evening in 2009 when the past, buried for over half a century, began to stir. Dolly's daughter, who had grown up watching her mother navigate life with a quiet resilience, had long noticed an emptiness in her mother's history, like a book missing its first chapters. Darlene, still legally known by the name her abductor had given her, had never hidden that she didn't know much about her earliest years. There were no baby pictures, no stories about her first day of kindergarten, no memories of extended family gatherings. She simply said she had grown up somewhere else and that her family wasn't around. But her daughter could feel it. There was a wound there, deep and unspoken. On a whim, or maybe driven by an intuition she couldn't explain, her daughter reached out to KTRK-TV, a Houston news station, and shared her mother's unusual story. A woman abducted as a child, no trace of her original family, no knowledge of her birth name, just a string of fragmented memories, playing outside in a small neighborhood, hearing train whistles in the distance, and the warm, humid air of summers that felt endless. The TV producers listened, sensing there was something here, and agreed to feature the case. The broadcast went out into Houston's homes one evening, images of Dolly, her story pieced together as best it could be told. In the dim living rooms of the Fifth Ward, in the kitchens where families prepared dinner, and in bedrooms where old televisions flickered against the walls, people watched. And in one of those homes, a pair of elderly siblings froze. The woman on the screen, she had the same eyes as their sister, the same shape of her smile. Even the way she tilted her head felt familiar. But their sister had been gone for 55 years, taken in a moment they could never erase. They leaned closer to the TV, as if afraid that blinking might cause her to disappear again. That night, the phone rang at the station. The call was shaky, almost unbelievable. "I think the woman you just showed, she's our sister." The news anchor on duty felt a chill. After decades, after countless cases that never reached an ending, this one might be different. When the station relayed the message to Dolly, she didn't know what to think. A part of her was terrified. Another part, the part that had spent her whole life feeling untethered, burned with cautious hope. She agreed to speak with the people who claimed to be her siblings. The first phone conversation was surreal. A voice on the other end saying her birth name, not the name she had carried all her adult life. "Darlene," the voice said softly, almost as if speaking to a ghost. She cried before she could even respond. Plans were made quickly, as if they all feared that any delay might let the moment slip away. Within days, Dolly stood in a quiet Houston street, her heart pounding as a group of strangers approached. They were older now, lined with the marks of time, but she knew. The woman who reached for her hand didn't hesitate, and the man beside her, tears spilling freely, called her sister, as if trying to reclaim every lost year in a single word. Cameras captured the moment for the evening news, but even they couldn't fully translate the weight of what was happening. Dolly clung to them, breathing them in, realizing that for the first time since she was 5 years old, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The reunion was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Dolly found herself stepping into a life that felt both brand new and impossibly familiar. Her siblings brought out photo albums from the 1950s, sepia-toned portraits of her as a little girl, grinning with a gap in her front teeth, standing between two brothers who now had silver in their hair. She saw her mother's face in those old photographs, the same gentle curve of the jawline she glimpsed in the mirror each morning. It was overwhelming, like looking into a life that had been paused for more than half a century and was now playing again, but in fast forward. The stories came slowly at first. Her siblings told her about the day she vanished in 1954, how their father had been frantic, how neighbors combed the streets, how their mother never stopped looking. They showed her the street she had grown up on, the house where she had once played on the porch, the old school she never got to return to. Walking those streets, Dolly felt the strangest sensation. Flashes of half-buried memories rising to the surface like ripples breaking on water. But the joy of reunion carried a shadow. She also had to reckon with the years stolen from her, the birthdays missed, the moments that could never be reclaimed. The one who had abducted her was gone, taking with her the full truth of why. There would be no apologies, no explanations, only unanswered questions. And yet, Dolly realized that her story wasn't just about loss, it was about survival. For decades, she had lived without knowing where she came from, yet she had built a life, raised a family, and kept her spirit intact. Now, with her siblings beside her, she finally had a past to stand on, a foundation to anchor the rest of her life. And in a quiet moment, she told a reporter, "Some people spend their whole lives not knowing where they belong. I thought I was one of them, but now I know. I'm home." Dolly's story spread far beyond Houston, touching hearts across the country. People wrote letters and emails saying her reunion gave them hope that no matter how much time has passed, lost loved ones can still find their way back. She became living proof that even after decades, the thread of family can stretch across time and still hold strong. And for her, every phone call from a sibling, every shared meal, every laugh over old memories was a small victory against the years they had been apart. Because sometimes, the most incredible rescues don't come from police sirens or breaking news. They come quietly, through a flicker on a TV screen, a familiar face, and the unshakable bond of blood. If this story touched you, don't just move on, hit that like button, subscribe for more true stories of hope and survival, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late for a miracle.